So, at first, do you recommend going for creating a policy first without just to have that detection and sort of a monitoring on the behavior? Then once we've got a hang of it, that's where we involve DLP in those cases.
You've
Yeah,
got
look,
indicators here.
you've got indicators there.
Indicators. Mm-hmm.
What you'll see in that framework that I created is that one of the most important thing is going through the indicators with the right stakeholders, whether that's
Yeah.
HR, or you know, IT managers, the business. One of the very first things that I would recommend to do is to turn on the analytics on Insider Risk. So the very top here. So if you look at the overview, the top card here is actually, go through like every single one of these recommendation. The very first one is actually turning on the analytics. Now, what this does, or what analytic does, is actually extract some of the user behavior within audit log, right? And then what it will actually do, turn those pattern of behaviors into results, what people are actually doing, right? So one of the first things to do, because this normally takes about 48 hours. So, right off the bat, recommendation to your customer, turn that on. It'll take about 48 hours. And then once you go to the results, this is the stuff that's going to give you. It's a pretty high level, but this is really more around generally what people are doing. So you can imagine this is just my demo tenant. So you can imagine for a customer that's been, using Purview for quite some time, using Microsoft 365 for quite some time. They've got some maturity around data classification, sensitive info types. You're going to get a whole bunch of recommendation and report on here, right? So, and then if you scroll down, it gives you a bit more granular in terms of, Copilot, entering risky prompts around Copilot. Now, again, these are logs from audit log that's being pulled and extracted to what you see now, right? Again, high level report. What are the things that you can do with that high level report? Now, if you keep scrolling down, you got the top exploitation activities, people sharing sensitive info types, emails using emails. You got people downloading from SharePoint files. So we're talking about sensitive data being downloaded. We got people sharing from SharePoint sites. Now, what do you do with this information? No, so what I generally do is that when I have that conversation with the customer, is that this is going to be my recommendation, is that we create policies around the user behavior, right? So let's create a policy to stop, or maybe even just just have monitor some of the user behavior, and then leverage around the machine learning to we'll go through the adaptive protection next. Leverage the machine learning to then stop and educate people from doing this, right? And then we'll go through the whole user scoring system in a sec. But this is one of the things I will do to then leverage this report to create the following policies. If you go back to overview, and then it'll take you through the other pieces. Recommendation. Again, this is just more probably taking you to the articles, so best practice, common terms. Most importantly, this is where, Osman, you mentioned about indicators. So these are some of the indicators you'll see. If I go through this, it won't actually take me there. If I go to Insider Risk, similar to the DLP configuration, if you go to here and then Insider Risk, it'll take you through this part. Now, you guys remember earlier when I said about, Purview is good on its own, Purview is even greater once you start integrating that with the rest of the security stack. The analytics part, where one of the things that you want to do is turn on these. The data sharing is where I see, and this is fairly new. I think it's probably about 1.5 to 2 years, where you can now share some of the alerts and alerts to Defender XDR, right? So when you turn this on, like by default, I think this is turned off. No, it is turned off. So turn this on. So now you'll start seeing the alerts in Defender XDR alerts. And obviously we'll take you through. I'll take you through the Defender XDR, what it looks like. When you turn this on, you'll get all the stuff there, and then you can start building incidents and being able to triage some of these use cases here. I won't go through every single one of these. This is really, for you to go through some of these really cool options that you can do from a detection perspective. You can create different groups, global exclusion. If you're potentially with a global tenant, you can create some specific keywords, sensitive info types that you want to exclude in the indicators. This is handy to have when you kind of want to reduce some of the noises. Now, going back to who looks after this product, one of the things I'll just make sure that I don't forget this, when you go to privacy at the end of this settings, you can either sodomize the version of the usernames, or you can keep this as, like leave it as usernames, right? Leave it open. Now, bit risky in terms of when you do reports, maybe you don't have the right people looking after this platform. You may have VIPs that you might say no to this in terms of, they might not want you to have to see some of the behavior that they were doing. It might not be intentional, might not be fraud, might not be anything risky, but it might be like, I just don't want my name in the reports, right? When you're thinking about it. So again, a conversation with HR, not for yourself to decide on. But this is really handy to know that you can basically privatize, sodomize the username. So you might still want them in the reports, but sodomize the names, right? Think about that going forward. Now, policy indicators, actually notifications. So think about building the groups, the role groups. Everything is role based. So in terms of Purview, who's got access to that particular one? So you might have risk, insider risk management, insider risk analysts, and maybe investigators. So, maybe incident, like maybe use cases similar to yours, Sam, that you might just have the insider risk investigator because that's your role. Insider risk management looks at the platform, something that you might not need to, right? And probably saves you from being able to see things that you might not need to see. But again, I know a lot of people with similar roles that you, like they're basically their roles are investigators. So they've got access to insider risk, they've got access to e-discovery, they've got access to audit logs, but they don't have access to other things.
Yep.
That's their role, right? So
Yeah,
that
at the
gives
same
you.
yeah, at the same time, sorry, the e-discovery guys, they create legal cases and everything. We have to, establish the RBAC accordingly so that the IRM analyst or the people within the IRM should not be able to see the cases which have been created by e-discovery team.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick question to the group. So on those use cases, do we approach that using the roles and scopes by the Microsoft Purview portal?
Yep.
Do we achieve that? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go into this little box here again, you should go to the roles and scopes, and then you should see the list of groups for that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But
Again,
but sometimes you struggle with that as well.
yeah.
I was recently got into this, and for one of the project, they simply decided not to use IRM just because of this cross-pollination amongst the groups. Some,
One of my ex-colleagues created an RBAC that maps different roles. I'll share that with you guys after this, and that might help you going forward. He keeps it pretty dynamic and up to date. That might help you with that. That's because he's on top of that, and it's pretty dynamic because any new roles that comes through Microsoft that gets updated. And then I'll share that with you after this call. Okay. Policy indicators. So this is where we use this as a what do we want to detect. All right. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of different things that you want to detect potentially, right? So as a very minimum and probably the most common indicator here is probably the office indicators. So when you think about user behavior, like as you can see, there's a whole lot of different features here. Like the question is, do you want to detect every single one? Probably not, right? Like, do you want to detect, someone syncing content from SharePoint or syncing content from OneDrive? Like that's the stuff that you probably go question mark. But a lot of this stuff where you probably need to articulate it to HR because again, HR probably needs to own this. For me, very common ones like sharing SharePoint files with people outside, sharing folders outside. These are the common ones, right? So deleting SharePoint files. So I generally keep some of this stuff like by default. I'll take off some of the things that I probably don't think. Again, every customer is going to be different. I've seen customers I've seen customers tick every single thing. I've seen customers just tick a couple of things. Obviously, probably better the more minimal it is because you can focus on the actual activity itself. But as you can see, the office indicator is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Now, going forward, when you're building some of these other use cases like device indicators that's specific to, sorry, I don't have my devices onboarded on this demo lab. As you can see here, again, similar to the DLP, these are the indicators from just an indicator, right? We're not actioning this if we don't have the endpoint DLP in like live. We don't have an action point, but we can still see some of the behavior, right? We can still build the user scoring if people are doing this, right? And I'll talk about the scoring system later on. So go through some of this stuff. Probably more relevant for you guys with some of the stuff that's going on with projects that's out there. Generative AI apps. So Copilot experiences, that's part of E5. You probably get a little bit more. I think there's some other ones that are not free. So you can see here, if I open that up now, it's actually different. Oh, here. So Microsoft 365 Copilot is free. So anything that's, risky, prompting, risky usage of Copilot, we should be able to see that because one is free. Copilot in Fabric, Security Copilot, that's PAYG. Copilot Studio is also for free. So I tend to just tick all that. So if I tick. Now this is also tick. Some of the other AI, this is going to be PAYG. All right. So enterprise AI, so anything that you built within your potentially say Entra, you're using your Entra IDs to log into these AI apps. These are your enterprise AI apps. Other AI, this is just new as well. So you can imagine, there's some indicators here that might be more probably security than HR. But again, if you've got projects happening with that customer or your environment, these are good to know features that are available for you, right? Because there's just a lot of stuff happening in AI, but that's why I wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of this particular indicator. If you've got a lot of customers that are adopting Copilot, leverage the E5 Copilot experiences because that's handy. You'll see, we'll go for DSPM after this, and then I'll tell you what it looks like from an AI activity log. So that's kind of the most common ones. Obviously, you've got DLP, Entra ID indicators there, but we'll focus on those things. We'll create a, well, let's save this. If it saves, yeah, think about the different customers you have and where insider risk will be very useful. I mean, the insider risk is very useful for most customers, but think about the industries they're in. Health, if they're federal government agencies, insider risk is, let's say, pretty common from the stories that you hear from news. Just, you can probably search something on the web and then copy that because as a positioning insider risk. So fairly common, not heavily used, but is starting to really make headwaves in the last year or so, because it's an evolving, and it has evolved as a product. So let's create first, just give you guys an example of this. Let's create a very quick one, and then because we've got a couple of more workloads to go through, but I'll be very quick on the last two. So let's create a custom policy here. One of the most common scenarios, which is the leaving users. So the very first one here, which is a data theft by departing users, is probably one of the most common ones that is normally asked by customers. So the data leak one is pretty common, but this one I love positioning this one because you're working with HR, right? So they're starting to feel like you're positioning this product that's owned by them. And the reason for that is the HR data connector is actually, when you're thinking about people departing the business, so generally, like, common theme is like they give like a 4 weeks notice, right? So HR normally has access to the people that are leaving, whether it's connecting it with a third party, like say ServiceNow. So they've got access to spreadsheet. They can, you can build a spreadsheet and help them build a spreadsheet. They can update that. So what you can do is actually, when you look at the HR data connector, and I'll share the web page for you. As an example, let's just use this as an example. My departing users. Just use that as an example. So with that spreadsheet, and basically what I've actually done is before today's, I created that HR data connector. You have to actually create an Entra app registration. What the actual data connector does is actually builds a connector within Purview. So I might just show you that very quickly. can see it. So I created the app registration. I connected the connector. I also uploaded the and run some PowerShell script to allow the dynamic update on the spreadsheet that HR then builds. Right. So the data connectors that you'll see here is all the connectors that are available. And you also have a healthcare data connector, right? So is it HR? Is that the one I've got? Yep. Oh, where is that? Oh, I think that's built. Okay. That's why it's not coming up because it's already done. Oh, cool. Go back to here. So for this one, as you can see here, if you've never done this before, you can, and this is where this whole better together story of sensitivity labels, sensitive info types really comes in, because when you're getting to this point of the Purview deployment as a whole, Insider Risk allows you to prioritize content, right? What you don't want to do is well, some customers do. Where you want to go to is actually prioritize the content that you want to focus on, what people might be doing something wrong, right? So for this example, let's just use this as an example. So if I just choose the label, well, I want to prioritize, labels, because I want to see what people are doing with my documents that are sensitive. So if I just go highly confidential, let's pick that as an example. I want to get an alerts for all activities. Actually, I don't want that, because what that will give me is just a lot of noise, right? So I want to get only activities for that priority content. Now, if I don't have a priority content, yeah, I'm just going to get a lot of noise, which, in most cases where I see a lot of customers in my time at Microsoft is like they'll pull the plug with Insider Risk because they just don't know how to handle all these alerts and volumes of alerts, right? So you want to really get to a point where sensitivity labels, you've got maturity in that space where the highly confidential is being deployed and applied to your documents. So you want to go next. Again, because we're using HR recommended, we can just use this one because so if you don't have the HR connector enabled, this won't come up for you, right? So you need to create that first. Go next on this. We've already got the indicators done. Now, specifically, you can do specific ones for different policies, right? We've got a template one that we've built when we went through it. For this one, for those, so going back to the story that we're doing, for those leaving the business, we want to focus on some of these user activities that they're going to be doing or might be doing, right? So for anyone leaving, anyone downloading content, we want to hone into that user behavior, right? So once we've applied this, there's that sort of second layer monitoring for these people in that spreadsheet that are leaving the business, right? So we just go through that. Make sure you've got that. Again, you don't have to take all of this, all these indicators. I just want to focus on these indicators, right? 6 was adoption. So just go by default on this one. I want to click on the risk score booster. Now, if you're just applying this, you just want to see what it looks like from a testing perspective. I generally just, lower this to see what it looks like. So when you're testing this for the first time, just lower it, see what it looks like. But then when you're about to deploy this for the rest of the company, again, HR conversation. Like, what are the thresholds you want to, allow, right? Because, do we want to generate as many alerts as possible, or keep that low? So, Osman, yeah, your hand up.
Yeah, no. I thought I'd reserve that question to the end, but we can discuss now. What if there is no indicator available within that list? I mean, we recently got into a scenario where client wanted to know the information of downgrading a label from a specific label to a specific label, but there was a limitation there. Uh, we were not able to resolve that.
Okay, a specific label rather than
To
any.
Yeah, yeah,
Good question. I don't know the answer, and I don't know whether you can customize a new indicator. I think I've done it before a long time ago, but it's been a while. So, Andreas?
okay.
I've been trying to find out the same thing without any success. So if anyone actually finds a way to target it like that, I would be very happy if you told me.
Yeah,
I'll find out for you. I did one
discussed
a
with
while
Microsoft.
ago.
Yeah, I discussed with the one of the product managers, and they're starting to discuss this internally, but don't have any ETA on that.
Yeah. And I'm not certain about Osman's case, but in my case, it's kind of like if you downgrade from public to private, for example, we don't want to know. But if you start thinking or it's strictly confidential, we want to
Yeah.
know on the first one. There's a lot of noise in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, there was one user who was printing, I think, 10,000 or something, thousands of prints. So when we drilled down further, he was just doing print to PDF, but IRM was capturing it as a print.
Got it. There's no way to customize that, whether it's a PDF or an actual physical printer.
Yeah, it's not.
When you get these kind of feedbacks or scenarios, I think you mentioned that you're working with the product manager. That's
Yeah.
the best way to actually escalate that, right? Because the more
Yeah.
feedbacks they get, the more there will be action from the engineering perspective. So yeah, it's as simple as that in terms of creating an insider risk policy. As you can see, there's different scenarios there, but common ones is the departing users, just a general data leak. Now, one of the key things that you should know about if you haven't played around with this is the adaptive protection, right? So where you want to get to, once you've probably established some of the basic fundamental testing some of the indicators, this is where Insider is really evolve and to this pretty cool product. Adaptive protection is like basically leveraging a lot of the machine learning, right? So in terms of again, like I was saying earlier, is that your insider risk indicators is where it's more the sensory, what behavior you want to detect. DLP comes in to either block that once you get to that minor risk level or moderate risk level. This is where you build that sort of user scoring system, right? The other parts are, so once you start building this and creating this sort of risk level, so you can see here when you're building this risk level, is that when a person is, performs one sequence with a high severity risk, these are the risk score that they get, right? Obviously, you can customize this. Again, working with HR, but you can see that you can create some of these lists, like, what does this equal, up to you, whether it's medium, high, or low, severity as well. And again, really the action is, what do you want to do once a user gets to that level, right? One of the cool things when it comes to this is when you're building this out, again, these are the different activities that you can actually put in here. And this is, the sort of kind of scoring system that you want to play with. Now, there's obviously pieces here that you just want to maybe test, make sure it's working, maybe create like a little pilot group. But generally, like, I like to keep it pretty simple. Like, the things that I want, what I'm looking for. When you think about insiders, the things that I'm looking for is that when someone shares something sensitive, they've already got an alert, they've already got a policy tip. So they know that that's the wrong thing that they're doing, right? The second attempt or the second warning might be a manager attempting to say, hey, you've done the wrong thing. Getting the warning, additional warning. Now, the third time, you might decide to go, well, third time is, the last sort of line. You might then basically, you might leverage sort of conditional access potentially. So all these activities that the person's doing, it might be elevating the that sort of insider risk level. Once they get to that sort of very high elevated risk, you might actually then choose conditional access to go, hey, I just want to disable this guy's account. Right. So, and then think about different scenarios. So you might have a person is actually leaving the business, right? And then they have a sequence of like downloading sensitive information. They've shared sensitive information, and you've obviously got them in that sort of HR data connector list. The third time you want to leverage like conditional access to basically disable their account. If they're doing this behavior, say at 1 o'clock in the morning, you might not have help desk there to kind of see the alerts, and then you want to leverage Entra ID conditional access to actually act on behalf of what that user behavior is doing, right? So that's really handy to have. Something I really like encourage practitioners to think about and consider. Work with the Entra ID guys to work with you. As you can see, there's different pieces here. Like, it's not just your Purview guys. You got to work with HR. You got to work with the guys in Entra ID. Like, there's different components here. When you get an alert, just using this as an example, I'll briefly take you through what the alerts look like. And if you're not familiar with Defender XDR, just go to security.microsoft.com, right? And then where you want to go to is investigation and response, and then go to incidents. So the difference between, so you've got alerts and incidents. So alerts is your individual alerts that's coming through. What incidents does is actually like basically correlates all these alerts into a story, right? So if you've got these various alerts coming in and they look like it could be done by the same person or the same time, or could be something very similar, it'll put everything together in a story for you, right? So if you go into, say, incidents, and this is generally where I look at things. So I've played around with a couple of things. So I think I did one for involving one person. So if I click on this, if I just expand this, you can see some of the things that are involved. This is the best place to basically triage an incident, right? So sorry, this is very minimal, but just from a triaging perspective, from a if the SOC team is looking after this in terms of this, this is where they can go to triage it. Okay, so when we enabled the data sharing, we enabled this to pick up the incidents or alerts from Insider Risk and DLP, and also communication compliance. So going back to this, probably the last thing I want to show you guys is, and Sam, I know you're probably familiar with this already, or maybe not. So when you're getting all these alerts from potential incidents, in this particular part here, when you go to alerts, you can open this up and you can create a case in e-discovery, right? So when HR comes back to you saying, look, this person's done X, Y, and Z, we need to build a case to make sure that, we want to confirm that they're doing the wrong thing. They've got a case for them for insider fraud or anything that might be, they want to build a case for them. If you go confirm all alerts and create a case, and that will actually create a case in e-discovery. Okay, that's when you can build evidence in e-discovery. And then the things around it, we won't touch e-discovery today, but the things that you can do with e-discovery is that when you create a case, when the case is created for you, what it actually does is it basically pulls all the information and any sort of, I guess, any information or data that is specific to that person and that they may have edited it, they may have shared it, like containers that they may have access to exchange. So they pull everything together in a case, and you can build further on that. There's a lot of cool stuff with e-discovery that you can do.